Good afternoon, everyone at St. Stephen's. Andrew here. It's Wednesday afternoon, and what a crazy day it's been. You would have heard by now that over last Friday, Saturday and Sunday, Glenrose Woolies was shown to be a hotspot. Someone must have had COVID, and probably 3/4 of Belrose, if not all of Belrose, has had to go in today to get tested to see if they're COVID positive. Cecily was one of those, and she's isolating at home, and maybe some of you have had this happen today. Well, in this uncertainty, isn't it important to keep our focus on Jesus? I'm about to show you the second in the series of 3 talks by Paul Grimmond from Moore College, and his topic today is No Rest, as in K-N-O-W, rest. Can't think of a more appropriate topic on a day like today. So I hope this gives you encouragement in the Lord.
To know rest. What would it mean to find genuine, deep, real rest? It's an interesting question, isn't it? Such an important question in our crazy world at the moment. I want to think a little bit about it with you by introducing you to 2 sets of words that describe 2 states of life. Let me show them to you. Here's column A: agitated, anxious, busy, edgy, sleepless, uneasy, unsettled. Here's column B: restful, peaceful, still, tranquil, quiet, calm, relaxed. Now, as you listen to those lists of words, which words best describe your life, column A or column B? What I find particularly interesting about the 2 lists is when I first came up with them in September just last year, and I talked to people about where does your life fit, everyone said, I'm in column A, I'm agitated, anxious, busy, etc., because their life was frantic and they couldn't fit everything in and they had too much stuff stuffed in from breakfast till kind of after dinner and all that kind of stuff. And now, 6 months later, everybody's locked in their home. We can't go anywhere and we can't do anything. But what are the words that describe us? Agitated, anxious, sleepless, uneasy, and unsettled. Isn't it fascinating that at our busiest, and even as we've stopped, what we want is something different to our experience. Genuine rest, real peace in the midst of the mixed up nature of the world. And it kind of leads you to ask the question, doesn't it? What do we mean by the word rest? Because at first glance, you think you know what rest is, right? Rest is when you've been mowing the lawn all afternoon and you get to that moment when you stop and you sit down in the shade and you crack open a cold beer and you kind of breathe out. It's stopping. Or you've been doing the housework, or you've been hanging out the washing, and you just get to sit, and that feeling of the ache draining out of your legs as you sit down in the lounge chair and just kind of soak up the comfort for a minute. Sometimes rest is just stopping doing something physical, and yet we know that that's not rest in itself, right? Lots of people, their entire job is not doing anything physical. My job's sitting at a desk. I look at computers, I read emails, I talk to people, and some days I get home at the end of it and I'm totally exhausted. In fact, for me, some days, something as mundane as walking down to the water cooler and getting a drink and walking back again, that's what feels like rest. And at the moment, actually stuck inside our houses, rest is like just being able to go for a walk in the park, right? So whatever rest is, it's not just about being physically active or not active, and it's not just about being mentally active or inactive. When I rest, I still like to think about stuff. I don't want to just have this state of not thinking as if that's rest. Now, I have another friend who reckons that rest is just getting to choose what you want to do when you want to do it. So he would say, real rest is a lack of obligation. Just being, and I get that. I do a lot of reading for my job, and so reading isn't particularly restful. But reading is something that I loved growing up as a kid. And what happens when I go on holidays is I choose something that's complete rubbish. Fantasy or science fiction or a detective novel, and I just escape into that world. So being able to choose what I get to read is restful. But here, I reckon, is the really weird thing about being human. Have you ever had one of those days that you're looking forward to, a day of rest? You know, you've got a day with nothing in your calendar. And you kind of sleep in and you muck around and you'll think you'll have something good for breakfast and you find yourself, or you flick through your Facebook feed and whatever, and you get to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and having done what you want to do all day, you feel absolutely and totally rubbish. So when we talk about rest, when we talk about finding a place of real rest and peace, what would that look like? Well, I want to invite you to come to a little part of the story of Jesus' life where he talks about finding rest. There's a beautiful little section, just a couple of verses in the middle of Matthew's history of Jesus' life. And this is what Jesus says. Matthew chapter 11 and verse 28. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Jesus is inviting you to an experience of what he would call genuine rest. Like cool water on a hot day, like finding a seat on the side of the trail when you've been slogging along for hours. Jesus says, here's a place of rest. Now, I don't know about you, but my first reaction is a bit like what happens when I watch a telemarketer on one of those infomercial things, when I feel like maybe what they're offering me is too good to be true. Can Jesus really make a promise like this? Because look at the kind of rest that he's talking about. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And then in verse 29, you will find rest for your souls. Jesus isn't just talking about kind of, a little seat on a hot day in the shade. He's talking about something that actually brings a place of peace to the very depths of your being. Deep, complete, whole rest. And it sounds incredibly attractive. But at this point, I wonder whether Jesus should have hired someone in marketing, because I read the rest of it and I'm going, he got it wrong. So come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you. Surely he just needed to walk down the corridor and chat to someone from the marketing department. I'm going to give you rest. Here, take one of these great whopping lumps of wood that they stick over the necks of oxen to chain them together to pull a plough along in order to plough the field. Does that feel like rest to you? Or he says, come to me, I'm meek and gentle. Take my yoke, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. You're feeling a bit burdened? Let me give you another one. So Jesus is offering you rest by giving you something else to carry. I don't know about you, that doesn't seem to me to make a whole lot of sense. What's Jesus actually talking about? Well, let's just assume for a moment that Jesus is as wise and as kind as the rest of the story about him suggests. If Jesus is wise and kind, then what is he actually offering and why does it bring rest? Back with me to the passage, verse 29. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. What Jesus wants to say is that the secret to finding real rest is to kind of tie your life together with Jesus, to listen to his teaching, to learn from him, and to let Jesus be in control of your life. Now, I actually think that that's tied to two other things that have happened just before Jesus gets to this saying. There are two other little sayings that he's spoken in the last couple of verses before these that all say the secret to rest is finding truth about God. Verse 25, Jesus said, I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned, but revealed them to little children. There's a truth from God that really smart people can't always find, but God can make it known to children. And then in verse 27, all things have been committed to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and those to whom the Son chooses to reveal him or make him known. Jesus has come saying there is a truth about ourselves and about God that you can't just work out by being clever or sorting it out. It's something that God has to make known to you. It's something that God can make known to little children that the wise people can't see. And you cannot know God unless Jesus makes him known to you and chooses to reveal him to you. Jesus' claim is that there's a truth that he brings, a truth about relationship with the God who made the world, that will actually transform your life, and that knowing that truth, binding yourself to the truth that Jesus brings you about God, is the secret to true rest. Now, I don't know about you, but that's kind of scary. And I think it's kind of scary because I've grown up in a world that's taught me to be pretty sceptical about authority. I don't want to let anyone tell me what's true, and I don't want any authority outside of myself. I distrust politicians, I distrust policemen, I distrust doctors even. Am I being told everything? I mean, we even distrust, priests and politicians, is the famous saying. Religious people, non-religious people, people in authority from every persuasion. We've been taught, be very careful about anyone inviting themselves in to take control of your life. So the $100 million question has got to be, can I trust Jesus to be an authority in my life? Is it worth letting his truth bind me to him, letting him tell me what right and wrong looks like, and letting him take control of my life? Well, I want to suggest to you that there are two really good reasons that you can take Jesus' authority and trust it very deeply. And the first one is going to seem a little weird, but I want to talk to you for a minute about sex. And I want to talk to you about sex because I actually think our world has been telling us for centuries that what Jesus had to tell us about sex was stupid. The modern story of sex goes something like this. It goes, for thousands of years we've been oppressed and uptight and anxious and worried about sex. And then in the 1960s, this kind of liberation came along and we got taught to be free. You can do anything you want in the world of sex, whenever you want, wherever you want, with whoever you want, and it'll make your life fantastic. And the story is that we've been freed from a stodgy, uptight view of sex and liberated into a world where, well, we've found real freedom and hope and goodness. And so what Jesus had to teach us about marriage and loving one another, all those kinds of things, they're outdated. But my question for you is, what kind of world have we actually achieved by ignoring Jesus and pretending that we've found a new way of being free with regards to sex? Just think about the world that you and I live in for a moment. First, we've achieved a world in which it's possible to use sex to sell anything that you like, from cars to soft drink. As long as I show you a picture of someone attractive and attach you emotionally to that person, I attach you emotionally to my product, and so I sell you things that you don't need and are bad for you by exploiting your sexual nature. Well, that's great, isn't it? We've done so well by letting go of Jesus there. What about the porn industry? Just think for a moment about this for a glamorous view of sex. When you feel tired, sad, lonely, anxious or bored, watch someone you've never met, that you'll never have a relationship with or love, do crazy things with no clothes on so you can pleasure yourself. In our rush to leave Jesus' teaching behind, we've created a world that makes sex mechanical, selfish, and that entirely removes it from relationship and the kind of delight that the Bible speaks about that you have in a committed, loving relationship. Not only have we done that, we've actually made a world in which sex only works if it's fake. This quote is a couple of years old now, but it's from a guy who runs a porn studio in the US, talking about the difficulty of making high-definition porn. This is what he says. I will say that more care needs to be taken during the shooting and post-process, as you will inevitably see more details. Details do mean flaws exposed, but when done right, as we hope you can see in our content, it can look amazing. In other words, now for sex to be amazing, you have to remove all of the flaws of being human. You have to be careful about what pictures you take and which ones you don't. You have to do the post-processing right, so all of the flaws of humanity are taken away. So we've actually managed to create a world that's ignored Jesus' teaching and create a sexual world where sex has become depersonalised, dehumanised, and actually so much so that people in the medical world tell us that they're experiencing larger numbers of men who can't actually have sex in the real world because they're committed to a fantasy. Here's a quote from a guy called Dr. Harry Fish. He's a clinical professor of urology and reproductive medicine at Cornell University. He says, when a man chronically watches porn and gets off on it, the sensory stimulation he gets from the virtual world makes it much more difficult for him to get aroused, stay aroused, and be happily aroused by the real, live woman in his life. In other words, his frequent porn-fueled masturbation leads to sexual dysfunction with a partner. And as I've spoken to medical people, I know that this kind of thing is actually happening in our world. So we've detached sex from Jesus' truth about it, and we've been liberated to create a dehumanised, depersonalised, awful space for sex, and one in which actually most of the research suggests is harming our attitudes towards women as well. Here are a set of statistics and information from a website called Culture Reframed, run by a lady called Dr. Gail Dines. She's a physician and researcher who's been researching porn for 30 years. Here's just a scattering of truths that they've found. In a content analysis of best-selling and most rented porn films, researchers found that 88% of analysed scenes contained physical aggression: gagging, choking, spanking and slapping. A meta-analysis of 22 studies between 1978 and 2014 from 7 different countries concluded that pornography consumption is associated with an increased likelihood of committing acts of verbal or physical sexual aggression regardless of age. Another meta-analysis found that an overall significant positive association between pornography use and attitudes supporting violence against women. 30 peer-reviewed studies since 2011 reveal pornography use has negative and detrimental impacts on the brain. What we know is that in our rush to leave Jesus' teaching behind and find freedom in our world around sexuality, I think we've actually created a broken world. A world that actually removes sex from all the delight and joy and wonder that it's supposed to have, that God's truth, Jesus' truth, is designed to protect us from. We think we've kind of escaped a trap, but we've actually made a trap for ourselves. I think C.S. Lewis kind of puts it best. He once famously described us like this. He said, "We are half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered us. Like an ignorant child who wants to go on making mud pies in a slum because he cannot imagine what is meant by the offer of a holiday at the sea, we are far too easily pleased." Friends, when Jesus speaks in the Bible about what's good for us, when he talks how to use sex, how to do marriage, when he talks about dealing with our anger or putting away our lust, when he invites us to put away the evil in our hearts, he's not trying to be evil or mean or trap us or make life more constricted or awful. He's actually trying to lead us to a life that would actually look distinctly different from the one that gets lived when we stay in control ourselves. When Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you, tie yourself to my teaching about God and yourself," he's not inviting you to a trap. He's inviting you actually to freedom. But the second reason from this passage that I reckon that you can trust Jesus is because what he did in order that that rest might come to you. Listen again to what Jesus says. "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Jesus says, "Trust me because I am gentle and humble in heart." Now, Jesus could just be talking himself up, but actually his life tells you that that's not true. Mark's biography of Jesus speaks about Jesus like this. "Even the Son of Man," which is a title that Jesus uses for himself, "did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." Jesus didn't come into the world to demand that we follow him, but to serve us in order that we might see the great wisdom of placing our lives in his care and ask him to take control. The whole of Jesus' life is a story of care for people who are struggling, those in pain, those abused and mistreated, those who are sick and dying, the outcasts, the person who doesn't belong. Jesus comes along and speaks with love and kindness and grace and tenderness towards each of them. And more than all of that, as Jesus comes to the end of his life, on the last night before he goes to his death on the cross, we actually see the heart of what Jesus saw his ministry on earth to be. And so I want you to come with me for a moment, just to that moment at the end of Jesus' life. Jesus took Peter and the two sons of Zebedee along with him, and he began to be sorrowful and troubled. He said to them, "My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me." Jesus takes a few of his closest friends aside and he just says, "I'm in agony. Please, will you sit with me for the moment?" They don't know what's going on, but Jesus knows what's going on. Jesus knows that 24 hours later, he's actually going to be nailed to a cross for a crime that he didn't commit. And his life is going to ebb away as he bleeds out on a Roman cross. He knows, what's more, that he's not going there because he did the wrong thing, but because you and I have made a mess of our lives. Every sin and mistake and failing, Jesus is taking to the cross. Now listen to what Jesus prays to God in agony, knowing what's coming, and what he asked God for. Going a little further, Jesus fell with his face to the ground and prayed, "Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. God, don't make me go to the cross. I don't want to die like this." And for Jesus, the cup is an Old Testament picture, actually the anger and wrath of God poured out against sin. Jesus is going to take that on himself for all of humanity. "Yet not as I will, but as you will." Jesus cries out to God and he says, "God, if there's any other way, take it away from me. But in the end, I don't want to do just what I want. I want to do what you would have me do." Don't you think that if there was some other way of dealing with our sin and mess with God, that God would have found it? That God would not have sent his own son to die on the cross if there was some other way of solving our problem. But when Jesus claims to be humble and gentle in heart, someone who loves the lost and is willing to give himself up for those who are broken, he actually matched those words with all of the actions of his life. He said to God, "I will do what you will." And he even went to death on a cross, not for his sins, but for yours and mine. When Jesus offers you rest for your soul, what he's talking about is the security and the grace and the wonder of standing in a place with God that you know that everything has been forgiven and wiped clean. Where you can actually come face to face with the God who knows every thought you've ever had and every word that you've ever spoken and every action that you've ever taken. He knows all of it. And he comes to you and you say to him, "God, I know I've stuffed up, but please forgive me." And he opens his arms and he welcomes you in because of the death of Jesus on our behalf. So when Jesus comes and says, "Yoke yourself to me, take my burden upon you, listen to my teaching and give control of your life to me. Live as if I am the Lord of the universe." It's not an invitation to trap you or muck up your life or stuff everything up. It is actually an invitation to find genuine rest, to find a way of life that looks different from the world around about you. And can I tell you that that's a way of life that has changed my life. When I get stuff wrong, to know that God loves me enough, that he's given up his son for me, and I can come and ask for forgiveness and I will be forgiven. That changes things. And it means when I muck up my relationship with my wife or stuff up things with my kids or do something wrong at work, I don't have to hide, I don't have to pretend, I don't have to justify myself. I can go and say, look, I'm sorry, I know I've done the wrong thing. Actually, being forgiven brings peace and security and rest in a way that I cannot describe to you. And so what I want to do today is actually invite you to pray to God with me. I want to invite you to pray with me to ask God to forgive you for the mess that you've made because of what Jesus has done. And I want to pray with you to invite Jesus to actually come and take control, to put that yoke upon you, to take his teaching on, and to ask God for help to actually start living with Jesus in control rather than you in control. I'm going to pray these words that are about to appear on your screen. I'm going to pray them out loud and then give you a moment to pray those words for yourself. The words aren't magic. You can just pray what they mean. But if you would like to come to God, if you know that you actually need forgiveness, and you know that Jesus' offer of rest, of forgiveness and peace and wholeness is an offer that you want to take up, I invite you to come and pray these words with me to our Father who's in heaven. Let's pray. Dear God, I know that my life is far from perfect. I know that I make mistakes, that I fail in many ways, and that I sin against you. Thanks for sending Jesus to die so that I can be forgiven. Please forgive me for the ways that I've hurt others and hurt you. Please help me to trust Jesus. Please help me to take on his yoke, to listen to his teaching, and to give him control of my life. Help me to live with Jesus as my ruler. Amen. I want you to know that God is there and he's listening, and this is a prayer that God has promised that he will hear. If you have prayed that with an honest heart, with a desire to come to God, accept his forgiveness and live with Jesus as King, whatever you feel right now, enormous relief or nothing at all, you've actually entered into a new relationship with the living God through Jesus. And there's a whole lot of riches and wonder about that. You can find out more about that by getting in touch with your church.